The incident that I'm about to relate occurred many years ago, around 1969 or so, in the presence of myself, a friend, and several other people who were on the street at the time. It was a hot summer night in New York City at about 9 p.m. or so. It was hot enough out that even the elderly Ukrainian women who live on East 10th Street were still outside by their stoops on their lawn chairs, as it was still too hot to go indoors. My friend and I were passing by the old Russian-Turkish bathhouse on our way to my apartment after having had dinner in the village. Communal steam baths were a tradition back in turn of the century Russia. Some of the old white Russians who fled Russia after the 1917 revolution settled in the north end of the Lower East Side and brought the tradition of the steam baths with them. Suddenly, as we were walking by the long, high stoop of the bathhouse, we almost ran into a screaming black man at the foot of the stairs. He looked real in every detail, except for two things. He glowed purple and seemed to be composed of pixels, as a television image would be. He was screaming and cursing at someone at the top of the bathhouse stoop and kept looking back while screaming as he ran across the street towards the little group of elderly Ukrainian women who also let out a scream themselves. He ran about 15 yards east down the block, and just as suddenly as he appeared, disappeared into thin air. My friend and I looked at each other and exclaimed in unison, "That guy was purple." The Ukrainian women were laughing and chatting nervously at this point, and nobody could figure out where this guy could have gone. About a year later, I was in an old Bertino's bookstore when a small volume of prose and photographs caught my eye. The title of the book was 10th Street by Bill Benson, published in 1968 by Grossman Publishers. On one of its pages, the book describes three old women sitting in their chairs one summer evening on 10th Street between First Avenue and Avenue A. It goes on to say, one summer evening, there was a loud altercation directly across the street in the doorway of the Russian-Turkish baths. Suddenly, one man picked up a chair and brought it down with tremendous force on the head of another man. The latter toppled and rolled down a dozen steps to the foot of the stoop, where he lay dead on the sidewalk in a great puddle of blood. The ladies all observed this with very little dismay, and long before the corpse was lugged away, they had returned to their evening chat. I lived on 10th Street for many years after 1969, but never again did I encounter this man, purple with rage, on this street again. A friend of mine who had come from Russia was acting as a caretaker for an older man with a breathing disability who lived alone in a large, two-story building in one of the rundown areas of our city. The building had once been something like a VFW hall, with the first floor being more like a warehouse area, and the second floor being an empty dance hall, complete with stage and bar. There was also a basement, and I believe, possibly an attic. The first floor had been partitioned into rooms by hanging large sheets where no actual walls existed. It was a dark, cavernous place, with weird props like mannequins and paraphernalia from the World War II era strewn about. There were twisting stairways and little, hidden passages here and there. It was a classic, spooky place to begin with, but mostly from neglect. I can't remember exactly why we called it Goose Hall, as it had another name, but I think it was because there was a banner hung in front of the building at one time, referring to it as Goose Hall. It was a good name for a strange place. My friend, who I'll call Sergey, had taken the position of caring for this man, who I'll call Edward, as Sergey had little money and didn't mind the weirdness of the place, as it provided him with the room and board. Not many other people would have wanted this job. Not long after Sergey had moved in, he began to notice odd things, like lights being turned on that had previously been off, and pictures and clocks falling off walls by themselves. Since Edward was bedridden, Sergei knew it wasn't him doing it, but he found it annoying and puzzling. Then one night, around 2 a.m., he heard footsteps walking around on the second floor, overhead. He did nothing about it at the time, but told Edward the next day that he thought intruders, kids most likely, had broken into the house and were walking around. "That's the ghost," said Edward. "Don't worry, he won't bother you." Edward went on to explain that the ghost had always been there and did odd things like move stuff around or turn lights on and off. He further explained that the footsteps Sergei heard were also the ghost doing, and that sometimes the ghost also made sounds like boxes and cartons being pushed over on the second floor, even though the second floor was empty. This usually happened around 2 a.m. in the morning. Sergei, being an intelligent and educated man, believed nothing of this. He was convinced that it was teenagers breaking in and hanging out for kicks. He was determined to trap and confront them. Edward told him he was wasting his time and not to worry about it. For my part, I'd visited Sergei and Edward in this building, which was about a 30-minute drive from my house, and listened to his story intently as I'd witnessed phenomena before in my life and was hoping to see something manifest. However, in the times I visited, day or night, nothing ever happened. Sergei, however, as he was living there, frequently witnessed or heard some odd things, which he was still convinced was someone pulling a prank. Then one day, I went to visit and found Sergei in an agitated state. He wanted to tell me about what happened to him a couple of days previously. I was staying up late, he began, quietly listening to some music. About 2 a.m., I heard the footsteps walking overhead, and I grabbed a flashlight and ran to the stairwell, determined to catch the kids who were breaking in. There were no working lights on the second floor. I ran up the steps and onto the dance floor, where I could still hear the footsteps walking, and shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound. I was now directly illuminating the spot where the footsteps were, and I could still hear them, but there was no one there. Then, the footsteps suddenly stopped, turned in direction, and began walking straight towards me. I kept the flashlight on the source of the sound, and followed it as it approached me, but there was no one in the room but me. About 5 to 10 feet from me, the footsteps suddenly halted, while I continued to shine the light. "Were you scared?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, but I tried to think about it rationally, and decided that I wasn't going to be physically hurt, and that I couldn't let my emotions overwhelm me, so I decided the only thing to do was to turn around and to leave, which I did. Sergei said now that he was convinced that Edward was right and there was a ghost in the place, but that he would just ignore it from now on, like Edward did. As he was telling me the story, a chill went up my spine, as I don't think I could have been quite that brave, especially in an eerie place like this. But I still wanted to experience the phenomena for myself, as a story is just a story, until something happens to give you your own proof. It was several months later that I got my wish. I was visiting Sergei one summer evening, and we talked late into the night, and he was playing some new CDs for me he had recently purchased. It was about 2 a.m., and I was standing next to the stereo quietly, listening to the music, when it happened. I would have missed it entirely, except that Sergei got my attention and said, "Listen, there's the ghost." I want to give as thorough an explanation of what I experienced as possible, since it seems to me that there are some oddities as to how this type of phenomena is perceived. First off, the music that was being played was not as loud, as Sergei did not want to disturb Edward, who was in the adjacent room, probably about the level of background music in a department store. Secondly, I was in no way thinking about the ghost, and we hadn't even discussed it previously that evening. What I was hearing was the sound of boxes being pushed over and shoved on the floor above me. The entire manifestation lasted perhaps 10 to 15 seconds. What is hard to describe, and perhaps part of the reason I almost missed this, is that the sound seemed to be coming in some way from inside my head rather than externally through my ears, and yet Sergey was hearing exactly the same thing as I was. It was like tuning into a different world, much the same way that you can imagine a conversation you have had with someone in recollection and hear the words being spoken inside your head, only in this case, it was much more amplified, and the recollection was being controlled by someone else. The best way I can put it is that the sounds were not located in the physical place where I was standing, but were somehow layered on top of it. There was also kind of an odd purity to the sounds I was hearing, as if they had been recorded on tape, enhanced, and a little reverb added. But the sense of these sounds being inside me made the possibility that someone was actually doing that unlikely. I remember asking Sergey if he wanted to grab a flashlight and go upstairs and look. He said no, but that I was welcome to go myself if I wanted. I declined, and that was that. The rather dramatic postscript to this recounting is that the phenomena continued on and on for the entire time that Sergey lived there, and he basically ignored it and lived with it. Then one evening, he heard a loud bang in the next room and went over to investigate, only to find that Edward had put a gun in his mouth and blown his brains out against the wall, leaving a note behind, apologizing, saying that he just couldn't take living in this condition anymore. The police, of course, immediately put Sergey through the ringer for hours until they were convinced he had nothing to do with it. They could see, as he told me later, that he was freaked out and shaken, and Edward's daughter, who lived elsewhere and knew that Sergey was taking care of her father, was contacted and apparently didn't feel that Sergey had anything to do with it. She felt that her father indeed had taken his own life, plus the fact that he left notes in his own hand for everybody. Edward's daughter allowed Sergey to stay for a few months in the building until he finally moved out. After Edward's death, all the manifestations in the house ceased immediately. I'd like to think that Edward finally evicted his nosy and pesky tenant once he was finally able to do it, so that Sergey wouldn't have to be in a haunted place. After all, that place had already given him enough bad memories. A final note on the story. I've had a little training in writing, so I've tried to make this retelling here a bit more dynamic than a simple narrative. However, nothing has been fictionalized except the names and the conversations as reported, as I recall them from memory. These incidents are all true and dynamic as they are. This is the way it happened. I have twin brothers called Chris and Gareth. They have bunk beds, and Chris sleeps on the top. On some nights, Chris will suddenly wake up for no reason, and while he's awake, he says he sees a body emerge from the ceiling. The body, which he can't see the whole of, will float down and lie on top of him. He can't make out facial features or any other features to the body. It's like a slightly shining image, but he can definitely see it. Then, the image will whisper to him, but he can't hear it. It's like if I spoke to him. It's like the floater, I think that's what we call him, is in him, passing the message mentally, like he already knows this information. The first time this happened, Chris was physically sick. The bed starts to rock slightly and gets fiercer and fiercer. This wakes his brother, and Gareth wakes because of the moving bed. Gareth jumps out of the bed, quite scared. He stands back and sees Chris lying as stiff as a board, staring up at the ceiling. Gareth runs down the stairs to drink some water. When he comes back up, Chris is asleep, as if nothing had happened, so Gareth does the same. The next day, Gareth tells me what happened when I came around to visit. I ask Chris, and he doesn't remember much except the body, the whisperings, and how he felt paralyzed. Later, when Gareth told Chris about the shaking, Chris did not believe him. I think it was because he was scared and didn't want it to be true. Well, we tell our mother about this, but she said it was just a dream and doesn't seem too worried about it. After so many times this has happened, I started to get worried about my brothers. It hasn't affected neither of them seriously, but it still plays on my mind, as I've done research and found out some information I wish I never looked up. This is a true story, which deeply disturbs us all. Thanks for reading. I was camping at Jeffreys Bridge in the Wharton Forest last July 4th with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. We got there on Friday afternoon to get a nice spot by the waiting river, and we were right on the riverbank. There were no other campers anywhere close by. Around 9 p.m., a thunderstorm was starting to roll in, and we secured things before the rain came. My grandson, Ryan, and I bedded down to the back of my Suburban, and his parents retired to their tent. Unfortunately, I had to pee really bad, and since the outhouse was quite a distance away, and there was no one around, I thought that I'd just go a reasonable distance away. We were in the woods. It was pitch dark, but the lightning was flashing pretty regularly, and I'd scoot about 10 paces with each flash until I figured I was far enough. As I was in the process of relieving myself, the lightning flashed again, and to my great embarrassment, a woman was walking across my front and 12 feet away. Even though it was only an instant, I got a strong image of this slender woman, dressed in a long dress with long sleeves and some sort of bonnet or bandana, with her hair in a bun and pulled back. She was moving fast in the direction of the river. Then it was dark, and being embarrassed, I turned back towards the light of the truck, and as I moved back, I started thinking, where did she even come from? There was literally no one even remotely close. Where was she going? In about 10 seconds, she'd be knee-deep in the river, and how the hell was she moving so fast in the dark woods? By the time that I got to the truck, I decided that what I'd seen was not of this world. I locked my doors, and fully expected to see a pale face at the window with each flash. I should mention that I am a retired U.S. Marine, Vietnam veteran, and drill instructor. I'm not quick to jump to rash conclusions. I thought I'd share. Thanks. This house that I lived in was built around 1920, and I had no clue what I was about to get myself into. From the day I set foot in my room, I felt utterly depressed. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the fact that nobody had slept or lived in that room before me, so it did not make me feel very welcomed. Or maybe it was my ghost. There were 2 rooms to upstairs, mine, and my best friend's Carrie. Anyway, the first 3 nights, while trying to fall asleep, I would feel as if someone was staring at me from one particular corner of the room. Of course, I kept looking over there, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. I questioned my boyfriend if he felt something staring at him, and he said he did, but maybe it was from outside. I knew it wasn't. This happened every night. On the 4th day, the house held their first meeting, finally disclosing to the newcomers they thought the house was haunted. Believe it or not, I was very relieved to hear this. After all, I thought I was losing my mind. For the next 3 months, I refused to sleep in my room. I would sleep in Carrie's room. She had a twin bed we both squeezed onto. There was AC. It was North Carolina, but I still needed the protection of a blanket. One night, Carrie moved, which sort of woke me up. Then I felt someone playing with my second toe, the one next to the big toe. Someone was flicking my toe. I quickly grabbed the blanket I unintentionally kicked off and sweated out the rest of the night. My mom, who was capable of being a medium, like her mother, told me to sleep in my bed, that she was harmless. She said the girl stayed in the attic space between Carrie's and my bedroom, and the reason I felt so depressed was because she was, but that she was not malicious. Well, that was all well and good, but we had a man too. One night, while trying to sleep in my room, with all the lights on and the TV going, after 3 months, I sat on the edge of my bed, gathering my courage to turn everything off and go to bed. All of a sudden, footsteps plain as day walked across my room. I knew it was the male trying to freak me out, but I left and went into Carrie's room anyway. Carrie had the sighting of the girl, not me. Carrie was in her room getting ready for class. Everyone in the house was already gone. She heard someone coming up the stairs. Of course, she thought it was me. When she turned the corner, expecting to see me, she saw a female standing in front of my door instead. Then she vanished. We had many experiences in the house. People walking around, doors slamming, shadows moving. One of my good male friends saw the man ghost. He was the only one that did. The male was a kidder. He liked to tap you on the shoulder, walk across the rooms, and down the hallways. I even heard him talking to someone one day. I was up in my room, and he was downstairs. No one else was home at the time. I eventually just told him to go away and leave me here, and he did. One day, my other roommate and I decided to research the house's history. We came home and told the other roommates. That night, Carrie had stayed at her boyfriend's house, so I was the only one upstairs, sleeping comfortably in my own bed by then. Thank you. I tried to fall asleep, but heard knocking on the wall. I sat up, thinking it was the cats. The banging stopped. I laid back down. It continued. I then heard a door slam. I got up to get the cats, who only stayed upstairs, and bring them into my room. I searched the whole upstairs, calling out to them, but they were nowhere. I decided to look downstairs. Nowhere. I had one roommate who was very allergic to cats. That is why we kept them upstairs. We kept our door closed, just in case they got out. For some reason, I decided to look in there for them, and they were there. Somehow, the ghost opened the door and shut them in there. I have no idea how. I brought them up to my room, shut them in there, and the knocking stopped. I have many stories while living there, one of which is too freaky, and not many people believe it. Carrie's sister came to visit. We decided we would perform the sort of cleansing to make the ghost girl happy. We walked to the attic door. I placed my hand on the door just to point out where we think the girl hides out, and this energy just shot up my arm and made me just sob. At first it was like I couldn't take my hand off. All I could say was, "She is so sad." Finally, I got my hand off and stopped crying at once. We gathered some candles and things from family members, which held sentimental value to us, and placed them in front of the attic door. Then we sat down, with me in the middle, held hands, and closed our eyes. We concentrated on emitting love and peace. I opened my eyes at one point to see the flames of the candles reaching so high up. Once we completed the cleansing, the flames were back to normal. During this cleansing, Carrie said in her mind she saw a girl lying on a bed, just crying, but we have no idea why. Well, we tried to make her happy, and I didn't feel as depressed after that, but she became a little more active. I think we made a mistake, and I'll never presume to do that again. I will call in the professionals if I am ever in that situation. So, that is my story. Well, just a couple of them. Thanks for reading. I'm eating Mike and Ike's, my favorite candy. And if you like candy, comment, like, and subscribe. I'm filled with junk food in my body. I've got things in my body that are all sugary treats, like ice cream, Snickers, Mike and Ike's, and a heart attack, waiting for diabetes to come wrestle them in their arms. That's what I'm talking about. Everybody's coming together, and I mean the diabetes. I don't know what I'm talking about, guys, but you know, that's what I'm used to. Anyway, kinda still in my narrator mode, but at last, guys, here's your Tuesday, and I hope not Wednesday morning early video. Well, it's not an early video, I guess. It's just on time, which is supposed to be on time. I don't really have a schedule, guys, but usually I post either Monday or Tuesdays, and if it's really late, it'll be on Wednesdays. But usually, Tuesdays and Fridays are my usual upload dates. So if you're new and you don't know when I upload, just check those days mostly. There are days where, even on Saturday I do upload. So if you don't see a second upload from me on Friday, then you have to check Saturday. And we'll call it, tying our shoes in a way. Don't ask. Just think of it as a cool analogy. It's not really a cool analogy. Just comment below, share, like, comment, and subscribe, like I said. And I'm outie, like an outie belly button. I really wanted to say that again. I know I used that joke a long time ago, but you know what? I'm going to use it again. I'm outie like a belly button, like an outie belly button. Yeah. Woohoo. Okay, bye-bye. Love you guys. Haha, just kidding. I'm talking more. No, really. I just want to say I'm outie like an Audi car, that you drive. Okay, bye.